Okay, well, welcome to the fifth part or segment of this overall workshop on DPACT, this kind of idea of a teaching approach that I like to work with. We're going to look now, we've already looked at DPACT in action with the early stages of skill building for manufacturing technology. We then looked at how it applies or how it can be applied later with as in later on in the development of literacy with learners, and we're going to look at something quite different again. And in this case we're going to look at DPACT in action with carpentry. Now this is not exactly an area of expertise for me, although I do get a bit of exposure to this kind of stuff now where I work. In the picture there you can see actually my good colleague Brett Smith on location at a community project with our plumbing group, and he's demonstrating how to use the portable circular saw there, as part of a general carpentry skill. And you might like to think, well, and these guys are very much new. They're very new to a lot of power tools, and they are very early on in their development. So using all the elements of DIPA can be quite appropriate here. So if we start with the discovery element here, how is this guy going to teach this group of learners here? Well, he might start by talking about the overall work or task goals that need to be achieved today. And using the portable circular saw could just be one part of that. But he may elicit from the students, what are we going to get done today? He may go through that process with the learners, complete a SWIMS document, and then he may say to them, well, here's our tasks and goals, what tools are we going to need? So he could get the learners to start making some guesses about the different tools they're going to need for the different jobs that they want to achieve that day. And once the idea of the portable circular saw is elicited or given to them, he may ask them, well, what do you know about this tool? What do you know about the portable circular saw? What can you tell me about it? Has anyone used one before in the group? In terms of the instruction, now I'm just going to quickly go through some of the basics here we might like to start with, and then we'll go back and evaluate different parts of this to enhance the overall approach. For instruction, he may point out the parts and the procedures in terms of using this tool. He will most likely, I would hope so, go over the key safety tips that are relevant to this particular tool, and then he will give a demonstration on how to use it in various ways for various tasks. So that would be the instruction process. In terms of the practice, well, I've watched him actually do this, and the three lots of practice that I saw him sort of work on with the learners was doing basic cuts, 45-degree cuts, and ripping. Three common ways you would use the portable circular saw, and he would actually do some very closely monitored, controlled practice with the learners on how to hold the tool and how to do these different jobs with it. And then the application may be to get on with the work that was set for the day, and complete the job that was set. And using the portable circular saw will, hopefully be part of that day's work. But that's some of the basics in terms of what we might think about for the DIPA. I think it's important then to go back over this and ask ourselves some important questions. For example, I have pointed out, I always need to ask myself at the instructional stage, how accessible is this? So, you might like to pause the video at this stage and think about this instruction stage of using a power tool like the portable circular saw. Based on some of the things I've already shown you in this DIPA or DPACT approach, what sort of questions do we need to ask? What sort of things would we need to look at in order to make this instruction process more accessible? So hopefully you've paused the video and had to think about that and come up with some of your own answers. Some of the things that occur to me are, you know, are we, for example, making sure that everybody can see this instruction. Now, if you look at even in the picture there, you can see there's a learner that is pretty much behind the teacher, and he can only really see a very small portion of the tool there, whereas someone around the other side is going to pretty much see the full picture there. So, not everyone's going to see or hear these instructions in the same way. So, to me, videotaping or video recording this demonstration and these instructions would be really crucial, because we could then upload that video into something like Moodle, in the relevant part of Moodle for community projects. And if that video footage was nice and clear and showed the best possible angle to demonstrate what's going on with that tool, that's a way that the learners can rewatch this process, rewatch the instructions from the best possible angle. They can rewatch it as many times as they need to. We may have a follow-up task like we did for MTech, where they have to write out a list of instructions that the teacher gave, and then we're becoming very multimodal. We've got the visual element, we've got the auditory element, we've got the written element, and again, in terms of being accessible, we're encouraging them to remember these instructions by having them watch that demonstration again and to write out point by point the most important instructions and safety tips. And to me, they're some of the crucial things I'd be thinking about in terms of making sure this instruction is much more accessible. Now, looking at the practice stage, one of the questions I encourage myself and others to ask is, how applicable is this practice? So, we're going to do basic cuts, we're going to do 45-degree cuts, we're going to do ripping. Are they going to get sufficient practice with each of those tasks? Does everybody get enough of a chance to, do we have enough? Do we only have one portable, circular saw? Do we have a couple? Are they just going to do one of each or a couple of each? Is that going to be sufficient to let them go off and start using the tool? Probably not. But also, those cuts that we're looking at there, are they going to be used in actual application? So for the given work that they're going to do today, will they need to do any 45-degree cuts, or will they need to do any ripping? If not, this practice may not be all that applicable at this stage. So we need to think about that. We only need to practice the things that we're going to actually use that day, and we can always come back and we can re-practice different kinds of cuts later when that work is called for. That's just one thing to consider. In terms of the application itself, remember that the question that I said was a pretty good idea to consider was, is it actual? So are they just doing a job that's kind of like a simulation, or is it actually a job that's real? And one of the great things I like about GTech and what Brett does is that every single thing he does is absolutely real. What you're seeing in that picture there, the learners are actually building an outdoor classroom area at a local primary school. So they're actually doing a real project, and actually cutting up wood and cutting up different bits of wood is important to that day's work for a real project. There's a real application there. So yeah, you need to think about that. Are they going to do some application that is real, is useful, and is real world? So there's some of the things I'd be asking there. But the next thing we need to go back and think about is the critical thinking element, and go back over each stage of DIPA and think, where are the best places where we can embed a little bit more critical thinking. So for example, with the discovery activities that are already up there, most of those already do encourage critical thinking. But some of the other things we might like to think about are, when we did the work task goals, get them to guess the tool that they need, and what do they know about the tool. He may then actually point to different parts of the tool and say, well, what's this part? What's that part? They may come up and actually look at the tool, and then he may say, well, why am I showing you this tool? Okay, what are we going to do today? How are we going to practice? What sorts of things are we going to make? So there's other little questions that he could be perhaps asking that encourage a little bit in the way of critical thinking. In terms of the instruction, we could be doing, after the instruction process, especially if we have a video of this instruction, we could be doing what we did with the NTech example, and that is they could be asked to say, well, how could these instructions be useful to you? Why would this be useful? And then we can encourage them, before they go on and do any sort of practice or application, is actually list some of the ways they think this could actually be useful, especially the safety stuff. Not just the practical cuts that can be done, but the actual safety issues. And if we get them to think critically about those things before they go and do any of the practice, it can make a nice transition between instruction and practice. Pretty much the same sort of thing for the practice. If the critical thinking was embedded after the practice stage, they could be encouraged to talk about some of the difficulties or some of the dangers or some of the just some of the issues they had with some of those different cuts, how they think that can link into the application that follows. Or in fact, for critical thinking at the application stage, we could follow that up with something along the lines of, let's now measure sustainable practice. So we could say, let's look at how we practiced, let's look at how much wood we used, how much of the cuts that we made or the pieces of timber that we produced, how much of them were actually used in the job on the day, and how much of it ended up as waste. So that's a really good way of embedding the sustainability idea into basic carpentry. We could even have facilitated that right back at the discovery stage and say, well, let's think about sustainable practice. How is that going to be relevant? If we're going to use this tool, we're going to do some instruction with the tool, we're going to practice with the tool, how can we keep that in mind, that idea of sustainable practice? So, that in particular is a critical thinking element that I think is really important in carpentry or in any industry. So yeah, that's just an example of how we might work through the DIPA approach and think about the key question for instruction: is it accessible? How can we make it more accessible? Practice: is it applicable? How can we make it more applicable? How can we make sure the application is actual? And how can we manipulate one or more of these stages to enhance the critical thinking potential of that exercise? So that's DPACT in action with carpentry.